Hi, today I'd like to continue the story of the mysterious murder of Maria Martin in the Red Barn and the trial of William Corder. And today we're going to actually do the execution. So I left off last time, he was actually in the prison at Bury St Edmunds. I might go back and do some of the court trial and stuff like that, and also the number of women who wrote to say they want to marry him. It was one of their sort of fads. Sometimes women want to marry convicted prisoners for some reason, I'm not sure. But anyway, this book was written in 1828, very soon after the actual trial. It's a bit of a tatty book because I think it was rushed out quickly to hit the public. So the pages aren't all that well aligned. And let's have a look at this one here. We've got a picture of the actual Bury St Edmunds jail and all the people coming out to see the execution. There's the scaffolding and the big crowd coming out to see. And there's always, with all these events, there's thousands of people, and you get these hawkers and sellers. You got somebody there selling some buns or pies maybe. And there'll always be loads of trinkets to be had. So let's look at the page for the execution. Right. When we have at length arrived at the concluding act of this dreadful tragedy, blood for blood is the cry of nature, as well as the demand of divine legislation, and also the laws of all civilized communities, and these are about to be obeyed. The blood of the criminal is now to be shed in order to expiate the foul offence which he had been guilty. At 11:30, T.R. Holmes, Esquire, the Under-Sheriff, announced to the prisoner through Mr. Otteridge that the time had arrived when he must resign himself to the officers of justice and submit to the usual preparation for execution. Awful announcement. Although Corder was well aware of the precise time fixed for his exit from this world, and he could see the minutes glide away by the prison dial, which was within his view, he appeared to start when the announcement was made, but soon recovered himself and earnestly called upon God for mercy. He then took the arm of one of his attendants and descended to the room immediately under his cell, where his arms were pinioned and his wrists tied by the executioner, who officiates at the Metropolitan Prison of Newgate. Despite the time of these awful and page. Preliminary preparations, the Reverend Chaplain whispered some consolatory words in his ear, when Corder falteringly exclaimed several times, "May God forgive me. O Lord, receive my guilty soul." His handkerchief was then taken from his neck and put into his bosom. The executioner, at the same time, inquired whether he would like to have it bound over his eyes at the place of execution. To this, Corder made no reply. Everything being ready, several sheriff's officers attended with their wands to conduct the criminal to the platform. But before they could do so, his dying and, we must say, laudable request was complied with. He was taken round to the different wards of the prison, at the gates of which the inmates were assembled, all of whom he shook by the hand. It is quite clear that Corder at this time was in full possession of his faculties, because he gave a very significant shake of the hand to some prisoners who he had known from his childhood. He in particular singled out one of these of the name of Nunn, and, on taking his hand, shook it with more fervour than is manifest in regard to the others, and said to him, "Nunn, may God Almighty bless you." The unfortunate felons whom he addressed appeared to be much affected while he was bidding them farewell, and he hoped that the impression will never be obliterated from their minds. After he had gone round the entrance of the several wards of the jail, which are ranged round the governor's house, he proceeded to the debtor's yard, when 3 of the inmates came for the granting, and cordially shook him by the hand. After he had performed this duty, which Mr. Ottridge thought was calculated to prove beneficial to the juvenile offenders in particular, the procession was formed in the usual manner in order to advance towards the scaffold. The under-sheriff and the governor took the lead, and Mr. Stocking followed next, reading with great solemnity part of the burial service. Corder was sometimes at the side and sometimes in the rear of the clergyman. His walk was not firm, neither could he be termed very unsteady, except when he once made a trip against a pebble. He was dressed exactly the same as on the days of the trial, with the exception of his having substituted a pair of speckled worsted stockings for the silk and cotton ones. On the procession reached the steps which led to the platform, he halted for a minute when Mr. Stocking, whom the prisoner again made his grateful acknowledgment, read the following passage: "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believe in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whoever believeth in me shall never die." The officers and the reporters having taken their place within the railings, and the executioner standing ready with a rope and cap in his hand, the prisoner was immediately conducted by Mr. Ottridge to the fatal plank, which whence he was to be launched into the eternal world. The prospect from the place where the wretched criminal stood is of most beautiful description. The foreground consists of soft, swelling or gently rising hills, which are bound in the distance by the extensive plantation of evergreens, so that they form a picturesque amphitheatre round the prison. But his view, upon whom the eyes of thousands were fixed, his lovely scene of romantic beauty had no charms, and almost as soon as he glanced upon it, it was shut from his sight for ever. When the prisoner first made his appearance on the scaffold, there was a momentary buzz in the crowd, and all the men took off their hats. Although the majority of spectators consisted of male, there were a great number of female present, some of rank and dressed in the first style of fashion. 2 women of inferior class must have entered the field very early, as they had advanced to the barrier immediately under the gallows. Independently of the crowd congregated in the field near the platform, and the buildings being crowded by daring climbers, a number of equestrians and pedestrians were seen on the eminences of the background, who were excited by the curiosity to witness, even at a distance, the end of a man whose life and character had been principal topic of conversation for several months. The apparatus for the execution was exceedingly simple, and much smaller than the ponderous machine used at Newgate. Instead of being straight and cross-beamed, is a kind of slender curve, as faithfully delineated in one of the more graphic illustrations, and holes perforated in it for the insertion of the ropes. When the prisoner beheld the executioner ready to receive him, the sight of the rope did not seem to be appalling. for he readily turned towards the Minister of Justice and appeared anxious for the close of the dreadful scene. After the cap had been drawn over his face, Mr. Ottridge spoke to him and immediately told the executioner to turn it up. Mr. Ottridge then said to the corder that he had any declaration to make, that this was the time. At this moment, the prisoner seemed unable to stand, and an officer supported him. He then said in a broken accents, "I am guilty. My sentence is just. I deserve my fate, and may God have mercy upon me." The great silence prevailed at this awful moment, but the crowd manifested an anxiety to know what the malefactor had said. Mr. Ottridge then advanced to the front of the platform and in a loud voice exclaimed, "The prisoner acknowledges his sentence to be just and declares that he dies in peace with all mankind." A number of persons then said, "Does he? Then may the Lord have mercy upon his soul." After the executioner had fixed the rope to the beam and was busy in tying what he calls the mysterious knot, it was suggested to him that he had left too much of what is technically called the fall, in consequence of which he reluctantly took part of it up, and it was quite evident that Mr. Ketch did not relish this interference with his public execution. Mr. Ketch was a very famous executioner in the day. Everything being completely adjusted, the executioner descended from the scaffold, and just before Reverend Chaplin had commenced his final prayer, he severed with a knife the rope which supported the platform, and Corder was cut off from the land of the living. Immediately he was suspended. Ketch grasped the culprit round the waist in order to finish off his earthly sufferings, which were at an end in a very few minutes. So in those days, you didn't fall too far, so you sometimes didn't break your neck. And so often people like family or other people would go and pull on your legs or around your waist to finish you off, and otherwise you'd just be strangled for a while. So instead of breaking their neck, if they're still alive when the fall happens, you'd pull their legs and then finish them off. So this is what Ketch did. In his last agonies, the prisoner raised his hands several times, but the muscles soon relaxed, and they sank as low as the bonds around his arm would permit. Thus terminated by an awful and ignominious death the career of this guilty young man, which, it may judge from his youth and healthy appearance, would, but for his wickedness, have been prolonged to an advanced period, through which he might have lived in comfort and independence. Because he was quite a sort of middling farmer, so his life would have been quite good if he hadn't done this act of murder. And then after the body is, after a while, that they actually exhibit the body. Let's have a go through this. After the body was suspended, the Reverend Mr. Stocking read a short address which, could it have been heard by the vast concourse before him, would not have failed, we think, to have made an indelible impression upon their minds. This was, indeed, an opportune moment to exhort the sinner to repentance and reformation, when the struggling victim to the offended laws of this country was ignominiously suspended before them, when they had ocular demonstration that the wages of sin is death. About an hour after the platform fell, the body was cut down, preparatory to it being removed to the Shire Hall for the inspection of the public, and the multitude retired from the field of death. About an hour after the corpse of the murderer had been cut down, it was removed to a private room in the Shire Hall, where Mr. Creed, the county surgeon, assisted by Mr. Smith and Mr. Dalton, made a longitudinal incision along the chest, as far as the abdominal parts, and folded back the skin so as to display the muscles of the chest to public view. The anxiety of the people to gain admission to see the mangled body of the murderer was as intense as it had been at the trial and execution. The entrances to the court were literally crowded. After the surgeons had performed this preliminary operation, the body was removed to Nicephorus Court, where it was placed upon the large table divested of all its clothing except the trousers and the stockings. The public were now admitted by one door, and passing one end along to the other side of the table, made their egress at the other. Constables having been stationed to cause the visitors to keep moving. Many thousands of persons, and some of high respectability and of both sexes, availed themselves of this last opportunity of seeing the remains of who so long had been a principal theme of conversation. At 6 o'clock, the doors were closed, and the two eminent artists, Mr. Miserotti of Cambridge and Mr. Child of Bungay, commenced their preparations for casts of the head and face of the murderer. The head and face were shaved before the plaster of Paris was applied, and Mr. Kelly announced of the proceedings at the discretion of Thurtle at St. Bartholomew's Hospital was referred to for the mode pursued on this occasion. The countenance did not appear much changed, except that the under lip was drawn down so as to expose the teeth in the upper jaw. This had also the effect in obliterating the indentations, which in life was very observable on the top of the chin. There appeared to be a considerable effusion of blood about the neck and throat, occasioned by the pressure of the rope of the moment of the strangulation. After the artists had completed their work, the body was removed from the Shire Hall to the county hospital in a state of nudity. Mr. Foxton, the finisher, having, as he was before stated, claimed and received the trousers and stockings as a matter of undoubtful right. So bits of clothing were given to certain people at the end of it as well. So I hope that was interest to say what execution in 1820s would have been like. Much different from today, with public gaze, and also that the body will be dissected afterwards. Thank you for that. I hope you enjoy this video and see the others of my series, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.